Hello, 1, 2, 3. Here's my audience member. Get me set up. Polarization around political and cultural issues has existed for a long time, and it's nothing new. However, I do think that political and cultural polarization has become more intense. I think that's a good argument, and I think that there is also an argument to say that the current polarization is creating a even more binary system of political and cultural beliefs. What makes, in my opinion, the binary, political and cultural binary, so much more stronger today is social media. And a lot of people do argue this. Jay Van Bavel wrote an article about partisan selection. And in this article, he talks about how people now have the ability to use social media to choose the information that they consume, and in response, that creates an environment where people are only getting biased information. And because of this, people are becoming more consumed with either side of the binary. Now, again, this is something that has been around for a while. It's not a new thing, but it does seem to get exacerbated by social media. Today, anyone from your family members to yourself, people who aren't even politicians or that educated on things, can become critics, and they can also become arbiters of truth. And one good example of that is, your family members sharing things on Facebook. A recent thing that has happened culturally in America is a comedian by the name of Dave Chappelle did a comedy special in which he made a lot of jokes at the expense of a lot of different identities. And it just so happened that he had also made jokes about the transgender identity. Now, why this is relevant is because this whole controversy of Dave Chappelle's comedy special played out all across social media in what you could say is it's both a political and a cultural conversation. And because of this, I think it's a good example of how a topic can be defined by this sort of binary type existence, both culturally and politically, and how people approach things. I think that I think that the Dave Chappelle example is relevant because it shows how, combined with social media, the current polarizing and visceral nature of everything, it will exacerbate a topic like Dave Chappelle's comedy special, and it will create so much noise around that. And I bring this up because I think that that is reductive, and I think it's problematic. Just recently, the federal legislators had decided to take out federal funding for community colleges, which would have been a universally free community college for all Americans, out of the new infrastructure bill. But you didn't hear a lot about that. And I find that problematic in that whether you agree with that or not, I think the lack of conversation around that topic, but the more exorbitant conversations about Dave Chappelle's comedy special, is very reminiscent of how the current polarizing cultural and political topics are exacerbated by social media in a reductive way. Because while we could be talking about something important as our infrastructure bill and the possibility of having free community college, we're instead talking about whether or not a comedian's jokes were offensive or not. This also kind of translates into what I think is the ability of social media that we are missing out on, in that we have something that we've never had before in human history. We have in our hands constant contact with information, constant contact with each other. And with this, we should have the ability to mobilize and do good things and have great change. And so I think there are arguments to be made about why social media is bad politically and culturally, but I do think there is a great argument to say why it should be seen as something that could be incredibly beneficial more than anything in human history. Now, because it is such a new phenomenon, like I said, partisan politics, polarization, and the political binary has always existed, but it's fairly, it's more, there's more of an emphasis on it now because we have never in human history, to our knowledge, have had things like social media or smartphones. So, because of that, we can't really measure or understand how social media is going to affect us politically and culturally. I think it's very easy for us to look at how it exacerbates our political and cultural conversations, but I don't think we're at the point where we can fully understand what that means for the future. And, you know, looking historically, I don't think that we are in a place that is worse off than we've been before, but I do think we are in uncharted territory. And I think overall, it it's just unknowable to know what it means. I think because we don't have any grasp on what it means, I think that also means that we also don't have a grasp on a solution. There's really no solution to everyone's sort of complaints about social media and how it affects the polarization in the country or the globe. You know, it's not like we can just ban it. I think it's something that we just have to, like a growing pain, have to work through. And ultimately, again, it's unknowable, the outcome, the conclusion. But what I will say about this whole thing is that overwhelmingly, whenever I listen to different people talk about this conversation, I see people talk about it from different spectrums of the political cultural binary. And I see people come in their own conclusion, come to agree that the polarization that is exacerbated by social media is a problem. And I think that most people would agree with that. And that alone, in my opinion, is a good thing. I think that it is a good signifier that ultimately this will probably be worked out in a way that we'll look back and, you know, still talk about how crazy this all was, but at the same time, you know, I think that it's not as bad as a lot of people think. So, thank you.